Some rules were written by kings, others by habit, and somehow, centuries later, we're still bowing to both. You're standing in the quiet half-light of an early medieval morning. It smells faintly of damp stone, old wood smoke, and something like boiled turnips pretending to be breakfast. The castle walls breathe cold air onto your skin, and somewhere above, a rooster declares that it, too, has survived another drafty night. You stretch your fingers and watch your breath fog in front of you. The world feels old here, slower, smaller, heavier. You hear footsteps echo down a corridor paved in uneven stones. A monk glides past, muttering a prayer that sounds suspiciously like he's asking for coffee. You would too if coffee had made it this far north yet. This is the Middle Ages, the period of rules. Rules for food. Rules for silence. Rules for how to sit, stand, marry, wash, and pray. Rules for when to break rules. And occasionally rules about how loudly to sneeze. You probably won't make it through this day without breaking at least 3. Before we begin, if you find yourself nodding off halfway through, that's fine. That's the point. Just hit that little button before sleep claims you. Whisper a gentle subscribe into the void, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the modern world. Because somewhere across time, a medieval bell is ringing the same hour. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk through a narrow village lane, boots crunching frost and hay. Every doorway you pass hides a tiny world governed by unwritten commandments. You hear the rhythmic thump of a loom from one hut, the squeak of a hand mill in another. People rise with the bell, eat when told, and sleep when darkness insists. It's easy to think of these people as obedient caricatures, simple souls blindly following tradition. But look closer, and you'll see something else. A society obsessed not with control, but with survival. Rules, after all, were a kind of insurance policy against chaos. Here's your first fact of the night. In medieval Europe, people were fined for baking bread that didn't meet size standards. The size of bread and ale, yes, that's a real thing, dictated exactly how much your loaf should weigh, how strong your ale should be, and what happened if you cheated. Spoiler: you might be dunked in the river until your moral fiber rose like proper dough. There's something oddly familiar about that, isn't there? The modern food safety label, the legal jargon on your packaged snacks, little echoes of this same old paranoia that people might sell you bad bread. We still follow those medieval instincts, only now they come with barcodes. A child runs past you, dragging a stick through the mud, and a woman scolds him in a rhythm you almost recognize. It's not the words, it's the tone. The universal motherly music of "don't track that into the house." Except the house is a one-room hut where 6 people sleep beside a goat that definitely doesn't care about the rules of cleanliness. Ironically, even then, people bathed more often than you think. There were public bathhouses in cities like Paris and London, complete with tubs, towels, and sometimes scandal. But after a few centuries, fear crept in. The church began to frown on nakedness and leisure. Soap was replaced by shame. And by the 16th century, most Europeans decided that if you couldn't see the dirt, it probably wasn't there. Historians still debate whether this shift came from religion, disease paranoia, or just bad plumbing. And yet, here you are, washing your hands under modern water pressure, obeying an invisible set of hygienic commandments you never chose. The sun climbs higher, a pale gold smudge through the mist. A blacksmith begins hammering, and his rhythm syncs with your heartbeat. You pass by the village crossroad, where a faded sign declares which market days are holy, which ones are just business. And there's a strange comfort in it, this ancient choreography of permission and prohibition. You stop at a baker's door, lured by the smell of warm rye and smoke. The baker nods, silent, his eyes darting to the church bell tower as if it, too, is watching. He hands you a loaf so dense it might qualify as a weapon. You bite into it. It's dry, slightly sour, and absolutely perfect. In this moment, you feel the pulse of every rule still alive inside you. The morning routine, the schedules, the soft panic when your phone battery dips below 10%. Medieval obedience never died, it just updated its wardrobe. You smile, crumbs catching the light, and walk toward the distant abbey, where bells toll in gentle disapproval of everything that feels pleasant. And as the sound fades, you realize something quietly amusing. For all our progress, we still crave permission to live. Obscure tidbit. In some medieval villages, people believed that baking at night could invite evil spirits into the dough. So after-dark loaves were banned. A superstition so strong that even millers avoided grinding grain under moonlight. You wonder, briefly, what your phone's battery percentage would have been in that world. Probably cursed. By midday, the light shifts. The fog lifts enough to reveal rooftops dusted with frost and thatch. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, curling into the still air like sighs from tired kitchens. You walk toward the manor house, the center of rules and contradictions. It's where etiquette was born, raised, and sent off to haunt dinner parties for centuries. The air smells of roasted meat, herbs, and ambition. A servant ushers you inside, wiping his hands on a rag that's seen too many lifetimes. The hall is long, loud, and gloriously drafty. Banners hang limp from the beams, their colors faded into shades of respectable decay. At the far end, a long table gleams under flickering candles. The lord of the manor sits at its head, a man whose authority seems to extend even to the soup temperature. You take a place halfway down the bench, trying to remember which hand is allowed to touch what. Here's the great irony of medieval dining. People ate with their hands, but there were rules for that, too. You could only use the right hand, the left being reserved for other duties. And you were expected to wipe your fingers on bread, not your tunic. Historical fact. The fork existed, but it was considered effeminate, foreign, even sinful. When one Byzantine princess introduced forks to Venice, a local bishop condemned them as an insult to God. You imagine him glaring down from heaven, furious that someone wasn't stabbing their roast with fingers like a decent Christian. You reach for your cup of ale, remembering too late that it's communal. The man beside you grins with a mouthful of stew and drinks from it before handing it back. You smile weakly. Medieval sharing was less hygienic courtesy and more hope your immune system believes in miracles. And yet, something charming lingers in this table ritual. The quiet generosity of passing bread. The rhythm of ladles scraping bowls. The collective sigh of warmth and fullness. There's a faint irony, too. The very word manners came from the manors. These great houses where etiquette was invented, performed, and later exported like an accessory for civilization. Now, centuries later, you still hear the ghost of that old training. Don't chew with your mouth open. Don't speak until spoken to. Use your napkin. Each rule, once designed to distinguish noble from peasant, still echoing around modern dinner tables. You look around, half smiling at the absurdity. If the medieval elite saw your world's salad forks, scented napkins, and artisanal coasters, they'd probably assume you were royalty, or possibly insane. Outside, snow begins to fall again. A servant throws another log onto the fire, and sparks dance upward like impatient stars. Obscure tidbit. In some noble households, people believed that cutting bread unevenly could invite misfortune, or worse, bad harvests. So the task of slicing loaves was often given to the most balanced person in the room, which sounds suspiciously like the first HR policy. As the feast continues, someone strums a lute. The tune is slow, meandering, vaguely mournful, like the medieval version of lo-fi beats. You rest your head on your hand, listening to laughter mix with the clatter of wooden spoons. The warmth seeps into your bones, and your eyelids grow heavy. You think about the countless invisible rules you still obey, replying fine, thanks, even when you're not, waiting for the traffic light even at midnight, smiling in photos because somewhere long ago, someone decided that's what happiness looks like. Historians still debate whether manners ever made people kinder or simply quieter. But as the music hums and the fire sighs, you realize something comforting. Rules fade, but rhythms remain. And for tonight, it's enough to drift with them. You lean back, close your eyes. The room fades into soft sound. A spoon falls. Someone laughs. The fire hums in approval. And somewhere beyond the window, the medieval night begins again. The morning comes late, as if reluctant to rise. You stir awake to the faint sound of bells echoing across the valley. Slow, deliberate, a little too serious for the hour. The air is colder today. Your breath makes small ghosts above your blanket, curling up toward the rafters. Somewhere nearby, someone is already sweeping, and you can hear the bristles dragging across a stone floor. Cleanliness here is less about comfort and more about moral alignment. If you're clean, it's because you're pure. If you're dirty, well, pray faster. You roll off your straw mattress and stretch, shaking hay from your hair. A pitcher of water sits by the door, its surface frozen into a thin crust of ice. You break it with a finger and splash your face awake. It's not refreshing. It's an argument with the gods. Once upon a time, somewhere in the early Middle Ages, people actually loved bathing. Public bathhouses weren't dens of sin but lively social centers. Steam filled the air, herbs were added to the water, and for a few blissful hours, life smelled faintly of lavender and soap rather than goats and moral panic. Then, as centuries rolled by, something changed. The church began frowning upon too much comfort. A clean body, they said, didn't guarantee a clean soul. And so, the tubs emptied, the bathhouses closed, and Europe collectively decided that smelling faintly of the apocalypse was a sign of devotion. Historians still debate whether this shift was entirely religious, or whether the constant plagues made people fear communal water. Either way, cleanliness and sin began sharing a room, and sin didn't pay rent. You wander outside, past a frozen stream and the remains of last night's cooking fire. A young boy is helping his mother scrub a pot with sand and ashes, humming a tuneless song. Soap, it seems, is for the wealthy. Everyone else uses whatever's gritty and nearby. You bend down to help, and she smiles, offering a story as thanks. Once, she says, a bishop told the town that washing too often offended God, so the men stopped bathing. And then, she laughs softly, the women stopped standing too close. There it is again, that dry medieval humor, tucked neatly into survival. You follow her back to the village green, where a few barrels of water sit waiting to be blessed. Cleanliness is seasonal, ceremonial. Before big feasts, before holy days, everyone tries to make peace with the dirt. A symbolic bath, a fresh tunic, a borrowed sense of virtue. Historical fact. In the 14th century, doctors genuinely believed that bad smells could enter the body and cause illness, what they called miasma. People carried small pouches of herbs or vinegar-soaked sponges to protect themselves from invisible threats in the air. You can thank them for inventing both the face mask and the medieval version of hand sanitizer. Obscure tidbit. Some monasteries had rules about how many times monks were allowed to bathe. The limit? For times per year. Unless, of course, someone died or a festival demanded divine fragrance. For baths? Per year. And they still judged each other. You wander to the churchyard, where a thin layer of snow softens everything into quiet beauty. Even the gravestones look peaceful, half buried under frost. A monk is raking the path, humming something that sounds like a hymn but could easily be the medieval equivalent of elevator music. He nods at you, eyes kind, and says, "Clean hands, clean heart." Then he pauses. Though sometimes, the hands are easier. You smile because he's right. Somewhere between superstition and soap, the world started believing that purity could be seen, even smelled. And centuries later, you still live under that strange spell. Bleach bottles lined up like relics, shower gels with names like renewal and virtue. The holy water has gone commercial. You sit on a low wall, breathing the thin, crisp air, and realize that maybe medieval people weren't so strange after all. They were just trying to stay alive, stay seen, stay forgiven. The wind carries the faint sound of laughter from the nearby mill. The scent of smoke and wet earth fills your lungs. You close your eyes and let it all blur together, the faith, the filth, the endless rulebook of being human. And in that half-sleeping moment, you could swear you hear the monk whisper, amused, "For baths a year, you'd better make them count." By late afternoon, the village quiets again. The sun is low, fat, and orange. One of those rare medieval sunsets that feels like the sky's apology for everything else. The wind hums through the bare trees, and you pull your cloak tighter. You pass by a row of houses, smoke curling from each chimney in identical little plumes. It's beautiful, orderly, almost comforting. You realize, not for the first time, how deep this craving for order runs through humanity. The need for structure, predictability, a shared script. Rules once saved lives. Now, they mostly save people from thinking too hard. You wander into the old village square. It's empty except for a single wooden post with a fading notice nailed to it. The ink is smudged, but you can still make out the words, "By order of the Lord's steward, no market stalls on the Sabbath." A rule carved into public wood, because parchment was too private for obedience. You imagine how often people passed the sign, nodding, pretending to agree, then quietly breaking it when no one was looking. Some things never change. Historical fact. During the Middle Ages, even time itself was ruled. Bells marked the hours for prayer, work, and sleep. The day was divided by sound, not sunlight. People weren't allowed to just decide when to rest. The rhythm belonged to the church and everyone danced to it, whether they could keep the beat or not. Even now, your life hums to the same hidden metronome. Meetings at 9, lunch at noon, notifications that buzz like bells. The monastery became the office. The abbot became your calendar app. A cart rattles past, carrying hay and 2 children buried in laughter. You wave as they pass. One of them waves back, drops something. A small wooden charm shaped like a bird. You pick it up, carved roughly but with care. On its back, a symbol, a small circle with a line through it. The woman beside you explains softly, "It's to keep the fairies away." You nod, pretending you understand. Then she adds, "Of course, we don't believe in fairies anymore." She smiles. "But we keep the charm, just in case." There it is, the quiet persistence of fear dressed as tradition. The human instinct to hedge bets against the unknown. Obscure tidbit. In parts of medieval England, People buried shoes inside their house walls to ward off evil spirits. Shoemakers were, unknowingly, the first exorcists. To this day, old houses are occasionally found with shoes hidden between bricks, half superstition, half insurance policy. You look down at your modern shoes and wonder if they'd count. Probably not. Too much rubber, not enough faith. The wind shifts. You hear the distant hum of a prayer being sung in the abbey. The words are Latin, but the melody feels familiar, like a lullaby that never ended. Rules, chants, customs. They were all the same thing once. Ways to remind people where they belonged. Historians still debate whether these rituals brought peace or just kept rebellion tidy. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point of rules was never control, it was comfort. A shared illusion that someone, somewhere, knew what they were doing. You walk toward the edge of the village as night begins its slow descent. The first stars appear cold and perfect. Smoke from chimneys rises straight up into the calm sky, and you realize how beautiful obedience can look when it's lit by candlelight. You stop at the crossroads, staring down 3 paths. Each one looks equally right, equally wrong. And for a moment, you understand why people used to pray before making choices. You pick a direction, trusting the air more than reason. Your boots creak, the frost crunches, and the horizon swallows you gently. The rules, after all, are still there. They just change their handwriting. The morning light seeps in like someone poured milk over the world. Soft, pale, and slightly cold. You wake to the creak of distant wheels and the rhythmic clop of hooves. Somewhere nearby, a rooster is auditioning for the role of eternal alarm clock. It's too early for ambition, but that's the medieval way. Rise before the sun, before sin, before you realize how little progress you're actually going to make today. You dress quietly, your cloak still smelling faintly of smoke from last night's fire. Outside, the air bites at your nose. The village looks calm, almost innocent, but you know what lies behind those timbered doors. Paperwork. Not parchment work, not monthly poetry, but the early forms of administration, the proto-office of medieval life. You wander toward the local steward's hall, a squat stone building with narrow windows and a suspiciously cheerful rooster painted above the door. Inside, men sit hunched over wooden tables covered in scrolls, quills, and what might be the 13th century version of coffee stains. This is where the machinery of the manor turns. Slowly, noisily, and with impressive inefficiency. Here's the secret of the Middle Ages. Nothing moved without paperwork. Every acre, every cow, every loaf of bread was recorded. Bureaucracy was the medieval answer to chaos, except it often created more of it. A clerk looks up at you, tired but polite. Name? He asks, as though your existence needs filing before it counts. You give one, anyone. He nods, scratches it onto a scroll, and immediately loses it under a pile of identical scrolls. Congratulations, you're now part of history. Historical fact. By the 11th century, royal courts across Europe had already created massive administrative systems. England's Domesday Book, 1086, was essentially a nationwide spreadsheet, cataloging who owned what, down to the last pig. Bureaucracy, it turns out, predates spreadsheets and possibly your last tax refund delay. The steward enters next, his robes heavy, his sigh heavier. He adjusts his cap, mutters something about grain shortages, and immediately launches into an argument about the proper width of road tolls. You watch, fascinated, as the first great human invention, meetings, takes shape before your eyes. 2 men argue, 3 nod meaninglessly, and 1 takes notes that no one will ever read. Historians still debate. You think to yourself, whether meetings were invented to solve problems or just to make them feel official. You're handed a ledger, dusty and heavy enough to qualify as a weapon. Inside, you find neat columns. Rents owed, taxes unpaid, fines for offenses like keeping a goat indoors or interrupting a priest's nap. Bureaucracy thrives on absurdity. The less sense a rule makes, the more sacred it becomes. You sit quietly at the corner table. There's something oddly soothing about the scratching of quills, the rustle of parchment, the faint smell of wax and ink. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful, like the world runs on order, on careful handwriting and the illusion of control. Until someone spills ink. Panic ensues. Papers fly. Accusations are made. A man in the corner declares it a bad omen and refuses to write for the rest of the day. You slip out before they can assign blame. Outside, the cold air hits like a confession. The sun is climbing, the fields already dotted with workers, each following the rhythm of a rule they didn't write. You pass a shepherd counting his sheep, aloud, methodically, as if God himself might audit the numbers. You smile. The medieval office, it seems, extends far beyond stone walls. Obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, scribes were required to write prayers between each line of text to protect the words from error. Essentially, divine proofreading. If you ever feel micromanaged by your boss, imagine having to ask heaven for permission to finish a sentence. You walk along a frozen road, the horizon glowing gold. The thought lingers, bureaucracy wasn't just about control. It was a kind of faith, a belief that recording something could preserve it forever, that ink could outlast chaos. And perhaps in a strange way it did. You reach a small bridge, lean on its railing, and look down at the river below. The water moves lazily, tracing its way between stones. Slow, inevitable, patient. Much like paperwork. You sigh softly, amused. Maybe the first office workers weren't servants or clerks. Maybe they were simply people trying to give shape to time itself. You smile at the thought, your breath curling in the air like smoke. Then you turn back toward the village, because somewhere, another ledger is waiting to be filled out, and bureaucracy never truly sleeps. 4 baths a year, you think again, and 500 forms to fill out in between. Night creeps in slowly, a velvet curtain drawn over the world. You sit by the flickering hearth of a tavern this time, wood creaking, ale sloshing, candles burning low. Outside, the wind howls like a warning. Inside, the rules are different, older, quieter, made of whispers rather than ink. Here, superstition is law. You don't cross a black cat. You don't whistle after sunset. You don't leave your shoes pointing toward the door, unless you want to invite a spirit inside. A group of villagers huddles near the fire, swapping stories about omens and curses. Each tale is a rule in disguise, a piece of folklore that keeps chaos at bay. You listen, half amused, half hypnotized. One man swears that bread must always be marked with a cross before baking, or else the devil will claim it. Another insists that spilling salt invites disaster, unless you toss a pinch over your shoulder. A woman quietly adds that you should never lend fire from your hearth after dusk. It gives away your household's luck, and everyone nods because no one wants to be the one who tests it. Historical fact. In 15th century Europe, laws sometimes explicitly reference superstition. Which trials weren't born out of myth, they were codified by written edict. Fear was made legal, punishable, and bureaucratically efficient. The line between religion, folklore, and governance blurred until no one could see where belief ended and law began. You sip your drink, listening to the room's hum. Superstition feels less like nonsense and more like a nervous system, a way for people to sense danger before logic catches up. It's survival poetry. A young boy runs in from the cold, clutching something in his hand. A dead sparrow. He looks horrified. His mother gasps, covers the bird with a cloth, and mutters a prayer to Saint Francis. "If a bird dies at your door," she says softly, "you'll lose a loved one." The room goes still. For a moment, everyone believes her. Then an old man chuckles. "Unless," he says, "it's the tax collector." The room erupts in sleepy laughter. Superstition, it seems, has its exceptions. Obscure tidbit. In medieval Iceland, people believed in hidden folk, elves who lived in rocks and hills. When roads were built, workers often avoided certain boulders said to be homes of these beings. Even today, some Icelandic roads curve oddly around rocks no one dared to move. Bureaucracy may have built the roads, but superstition still decided the route. The tavern door opens again. A gust of wind snuffs half the candles. No one moves. The silence thickens, until the innkeeper sighs and relights them, muttering about drafts and bad luck. The fire crackles louder, eager to fill the tension. You lean back in your chair, watching the way shadows dance across the walls. The flicker of fire turns everything alive. The mugs, the faces, even the old rules themselves. It hits you then, these people live in constant negotiation between reason and reverence. They follow laws written on parchment and those written in fear. And somehow they balance both better than modern minds might. Historians still debate. You think, whether superstition faded because science grew, or because science simply renamed it. The night deepens. Someone hums a lullaby. The hearth's glow softens, and for a moment, the whole room looks like a painting, warm, imperfect, alive. You feel the pull of sleep, but the voices keep weaving through the air, carrying little fragments of logic disguised as magic. A woman across the table catches your gaze and says gently, "The rules aren't for believing, you know? They're for remembering." You don't ask what she means. You just nod because somehow you already understand. Outside, the wind carries away the last trace of laughter. The moon looks down like a judge too tired to care. The invisible court is always in session, quietly, patiently, and forever. The next morning begins in that slow, gray half-light between dreaming and waking. You stretch, hearing the familiar creak of wood and bone. Outside, the frost has drawn tiny constellations on the window. You rub your hands together for warmth, and it hits you again how precious heat feels. Not just for comfort, but for survival. You make your way down the narrow lane toward the baker's hut. The air smells faintly of smoke, dough, and the kind of hunger that's been waiting since dawn. You can already see the thin stream of chimney smoke curling upward like a promise. The door creaks as you step inside, and the baker greets you with the weary warmth of someone who's been awake since midnight. His apron is dusted with flour, his beard speckled white like winter itself. Behind him, the oven glows like a miniature sun. You stand for a moment just to feel its heat on your face. "Careful," he warns with a grin. "Fire likes to bite." He's right. In medieval kitchens, fire was both friend and tyrant. You fed it carefully, coaxed it gently, and prayed it stayed in the hearth where it belonged. Too little wood and the bread failed. Too much and the house did. Historical fact. By the 13th century, many towns required that each household maintain a covered hearth and a bucket of sand nearby, early fire safety laws. Some cities even employed a night watch who walked the streets listening for crackling flames. It wasn't just law enforcement, it was survival. The baker reaches for a long-handled paddle and pulls a loaf from the oven. Golden, cracked, perfect. He presses it to his ear and listens, then nods. "It sings," he says, satisfied. You try not to laugh, But he's right again. If you listen closely, the crust crackles softly, as if telling him it's ready. It's superstition disguised as craftsmanship, or perhaps the other way around. Obscure tidbit. In some parts of Europe, people believed that bread was alive. Before baking, dough was blessed with the sign of the cross, and the first loaf from a new batch was broken, not cut, so the bread's spirit wouldn't be wounded. Bread wasn't just food. It was a being that shared in your survival. You step back, watching the dance of light and shadow as the baker moves. Every gesture seems ritualized, slow, deliberate. The way he sprinkles flour, the way he keeps his wooden peel leaning on the left side of the oven. Never the right. Not rules written anywhere, just habits so old they've become holy. Historians still debate. You think quietly, whether these customs were religious or just humanity's way of taming the unpredictable. A few children push the door open and shuffle in, clutching coins and hope. The baker hands them small rolls, smiling as their eyes light up. He doesn't charge them. It's a secret rule of the winter kitchen. Feed those who can't pay, because hunger doesn't read ledgers. As the morning deepens, the room grows warmer, cozier. Someone brings a pot of stew to share, its surface shimmering with fat. You're handed a wooden bowl, and the taste is simple but rich: meat, barley, herbs, and smoke. You realize this is more than food. It's heat you can eat. For most medieval families, meals weren't just nourishment, they were strategy. What to cook, when to eat, and how much to save could mean the difference between surviving winter or not. And yet, they did it all with no timers, no thermometers, no modern precision. Just instinct, prayer, and patience. You sit back, watching the fire flicker low. It strikes you how many of today's kitchen rules still echo this age-old dance. Don't leave the oven door open too long. Don't let the soup boil over. Stir clockwise for luck. Tiny fragments of the past, disguised as good advice. A child sneezes and everyone laughs. The baker mutters something about the evil chill sneaking in, and a woman tosses salt toward the door. Another unwritten law obeyed. Outside, snow begins to fall again. You finish your meal, thank the baker, and step out into the crisp air. Behind you, the faint orange glow of the oven lights up the window, a fragile defiance against the cold. You smile to yourself. Fire was a luxury but also a law, and those who followed it survived. The wind hums low across the village, carrying the smell of bread and ash. You tuck your cloak tighter, the warmth still lingering inside you. Maybe you think the real rule of fire wasn't about safety. Maybe it was about respect. You walk on, toward the next small miracle waiting in the medieval day. Evening arrives again, blue, smoky, and tender. The snow outside glows under the moonlight, quiet as breath. You find yourself walking toward the monastery on the hill, its bell tolling slow and deep. Each ring feels like it's counting the world's heartbeat. Inside, the air smells of candle wax, stone, and stillness. Monks move silently through the corridors, their robes whispering against the floor. You follow their lead, instinctively lowering your steps, your breath, your thoughts. Silence here isn't absence, it's architecture. You're led into the refectory, where the brothers sit for their evening meal. Nobody speaks. A single monk stands at a lectern, reading scripture aloud while the others eat in total quiet. The clinking of spoons against bowls sounds impossibly loud. You shift in your seat and immediately feel like you've committed a crime. After a few moments, you start to sense the rhythm, the pauses, the soft chewing, the faint scraping of wood on wood. It's like a kind of symphony, one where everyone knows their part. And yet, it's not oppressive. It's calming. You can feel your thoughts slowing down, your shoulders easing. There's something about communal quiet that feels safer than noise. Historical fact: many medieval monastic orders, like the Benedictines and Cistercians, had strict rules about silence. Speaking without necessity was considered a sin of pride, an indulgence of the ego. Communication, when needed, was done through gestures, nods, or small slates with chalk markings. Essentially, monks invented body language before psychologists did. You glance around the table and notice something. Despite the silence, the monks are conversing. One raises an eyebrow to offer more bread. Another tilts his head to refuse. A small hand signal replaces, "Thank you." No words, but perfect understanding. Outside these walls, the world runs on talk. Trades, gossip, orders, arguments. But here, stillness is both weapon and refuge. Historians still debate. You think with a faint smile, whether this silence was meant to bring monks closer to God, or just to stop them from arguing about soup recipes. After the meal, you follow them into the chapel. The light is golden, almost liquid, spilling across the old stone floor. The brothers kneel, each movement slow and deliberate. No music, no chant, just the faint hum of wind through stained glass. You realize this is what the medieval mind called peace. Not comfort, not entertainment, just the space to exist without noise. Obscure tidbit: in some convents, there were speaking corners. Tiny alcoves where nuns could whisper prayers or confessions. Silence was so strict that these small architectural exceptions became emotional lifelines. You imagine them, faces close to the wall, whispering to the stones as if they were listening. After prayers, a monk hands you a candle. He doesn't say anything, but his gesture is clear. Take it, carry the light, find your way back. You bow slightly, murmuring a thank you you're not supposed to say. Outside, the snow has deepened. The world feels muffled, as if even nature is keeping the rule. You walk slowly down the hill, the warm glow of the candle haloing your breath. For the first time, you start to understand how powerful silence can be. It makes everything else louder. The crunch of snow beneath your boots, the faint rustle of your cloak, the beating of your own heart. You pass the village again. The tavern's noise feels almost shocking now, laughter spilling into the night. You smile softly. Noise is comfort too, but in a different register. The monks live by stillness. The townsfolk live by story. And both somehow are right. You pause at the crossroads, the candlelight flickering against your face. Maybe you think we never lost the rule of silence. We just learned to disguise it. In headphones, in late-night scrolling, in quiet walks home after long days. You blow out the candle. The smoke curls upward like a whisper returning to heaven. The stars blink in approval. You pull your cloak close and start walking again. Somewhere ahead, a new sound waits, the soft rhythm of a world still governed by forgotten rules. The night sighs, and the journey continues. Morning comes slower this time, like the world itself hesitates to wake. The snow is melting slightly now, turning the roads into ribbons of slush. You walk toward the market square, where life is already alive. Traders shouting, carts creaking, chickens protesting their cages. Everywhere you look, the same quiet pattern hums beneath the chaos. Everyone knows exactly where they stand. A butcher yells at an apprentice but never at a customer. Peasant bows to a merchant. The merchant bows to the alderman. And when a knight passes on horseback, everyone steps aside. Automatically, instinctively. It's not written anywhere. It doesn't have to be. In the medieval world, place was everything. You didn't just live in society, You were woven into it like a thread that couldn't be pulled out without unraveling the whole cloth. You spot a group of children playing beside a frozen trough. One holds a stick like a sword, declaring himself king. The others laugh, but still they kneel in the snow. Even in games, hierarchy survives. Historical fact: by the 14th century, society was divided into what were called the three estates: those who prayed, the clergy; those who fought, the nobility; those who worked, the peasants. Each believed their role was chosen by God, not chance. The baker didn't envy the knight because envy would have seemed unnatural, a kind of cosmic rebellion. A merchant calls to you, waving a cloth dyed deep blue, a luxury in this age. "Woad," he says proudly, "grown and ground right here." You run your hand along the fabric. It's coarse but beautiful. Only the wealthy could afford color like this. You thank him, though your coin pouch is too light to buy any. He seems to understand without asking. Nearby, a beggar kneels in the mud. His hands are cracked, his voice hoarse as he murmurs blessings to those who toss him bread. A priest passes, gives him the sign of the cross but no coin. You notice no one judges either of them. Simply the order of things. The beggar begs, the priest blesses, the world continues. And yet, beneath this rigid hierarchy, something human stirs. You see it in the way a merchant slips a heel of bread to a child when no one's looking. In the way a noblewoman secretly drops a coin into a beggar's hand wrapped in her handkerchief. Kindness has to disguise itself here, but it still breathes. Obscure tidbit: in some medieval towns, people weren't just ranked by wealth but by where they could walk. Certain streets were forbidden to commoners after dark, and even seating in church was arranged by status. The closer you sat to the altar, the closer you were to heaven, socially and spiritually. But power, like fire, could burn the hand that held it too long. You overhear whispers about a local lord who raised taxes before Christmas and found his stables mysteriously burned one night. No one saw who did it, but everyone knew why. It wasn't rebellion, it was balance. You sit at the edge of the square, watching the endless dance of order and chaos. Somewhere, a bell rings for noon. The market freezes for a heartbeat, as if the entire town inhales together. Then, just as suddenly, life resumes, and you realize, this ladder, as cruel as it seems, held people together. Everyone knew their part, their purpose, their prayers. It was both a prison and a map. As you rise to leave, a small boy selling turnips tugs at your cloak. "You look like someone who walks too much," he says, half grinning. You laugh. "Maybe." He holds up a turnip. "Then you should eat more." You buy it, not for the taste, but for the moment. A tiny rebellion against the unspoken rule that travelers stay apart. You take a bite, the cold crunch of earth and kindness mixing on your tongue. Somewhere behind you, the knight's horse snorts. The beggar whispers a blessing. The priest coughs into his sleeve. The ladder stands firm, and yet it sways just slightly with every act of quiet mercy. You reach the edge of the village as dusk returns. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys, mixing with the scent of thawing earth and manure. A pond glimmers faintly nearby, ringed by rushes. Women kneel at its edge, washing linen against smooth stones. Their hands are red from the cold, their laughter rising in small bursts. At first glance, you think, this must have been a filthy time. But look closer. The water may be muddy, but the linen shines pale against the dusk. The women scrub with ash and herbs, soapwort, lye, or rosemary if they could afford it. One hums as she works, the melody old and circular, like the sound of the hands themselves. Historical fact: Despite the myth that medieval people never bathed, many washed regularly. Public bathhouses existed in most towns, often shared by men and women until moral panic changed the rules in later centuries. Peasants used rivers. Nobles had wooden tubs lined with cloth to keep in the heat. Cleanliness wasn't about vanity, it was about virtue. Dirt was seen as a sign of sin, but so was too much perfume. The balance was delicate. Be clean enough for God, humble enough for man. A man walks past carrying a bundle of herbs, sage, lavender, mint. He explains they're for hanging in doorways to keep away bad air. You nod, remembering how medieval people feared miasma, the invisible poisoned air they believed caused disease. It wasn't true, but it wasn't foolish either. The logic was survival wrapped in superstition. Obscure tidbit. In wealthier homes, rushes or straw were spread on floors and sprinkled with herbs to mask smells. But too long without changing them, and the mixture of rot and roses could be worse than either alone. Queen Elizabeth I famously complained about the stench in old castles centuries later. It was a legacy of beauty fighting decay. As night deepens, you follow the scent of smoke to a small wooden hut where a woman tends a pot of boiling water. She drops in sprigs of thyme and chamomile, stirring slowly. "For the baby," she says softly, motioning to a small bundle by the fire. "The herbs keep the sickness away." You nod. The warmth feels like prayer again. You notice how smell governs everything here: food, faith, fear. Incense in church, herbs in the sickroom, vinegar in the street. People didn't just live by sight or sound. They lived by scent, by air, by the invisible. Inside your cloak, the faint odor of smoke and earth clings to your skin. You suddenly realize it's not unpleasant. It smells like life itself, distilled. The medieval world may not have known the word hygiene, but it understood purity in its own way, the purity of effort, of care, of ritual. You walk out into the open again. The air is sharp with frost and faintly sweet with wood smoke. Above you, the stars shimmer like distant candles. You take a deep breath, and for the first time you feel clean. Clean not because you've washed, but because you've understood. You look back at the pond, where the women have finished their work. Their laughter carries across the field, soft and bright as bells. The moonlight turns the steam above their basin silver. You wonder if, centuries from now, people will imagine them as dirty, ignorant, primitive. And you almost wish you could tell them the truth. They weren't unclean. They were simply human, doing the best they could to keep warmth and grace alive in a cold, uncertain world. You close your eyes. The scent of thyme and fire lingers, and somewhere, a bell rings again, soft, deliberate, like the world's heartbeat continuing. Tomorrow you'll walk on. But tonight, in this mingling of scent and silence, you rest. The moon is swollen now, white and round like a bread loaf left to rise too long. You follow its pale glow through the narrow lanes of the village, your breath forming small ghosts that vanish before you can count them. Somewhere a baby cries, then stops too suddenly. You find yourself outside a small cottage. A flicker of candlelight trembles through the cracks of its shutters. Inside, someone hums in a low, steady rhythm, half lullaby, half chant. You push the door gently open. The air is thick with smoke, herbs, and something metallic, blood, perhaps, but faint. A woman kneels by a small table, her hands deftly mixing a paste of crushed garlic, honey, and goose fat. On the table lies a child, pale and sweating, his chest rising in sharp, frightened gasps. "Croup," she mutters, or maybe witch's breath. She doesn't mean that literally, though she might, depending on the day. This is the medieval healer, the unlicensed, untrained, yet irreplaceable doctor of the people. She isn't a saint or a scientist. She's something in between, a whisperer between the body and the unseen. She takes a cloth, dips it in the mixture, and presses it to the child's throat. The smell is sharp and alive. "Breathe, little one," she murmurs. The child's breathing slows. The mother, sitting nearby, crosses herself. You watch silently, not wanting to disturb the ritual. The healer looks at you then, eyes like candlelight. "You shouldn't be here," she says softly. "Illness listens when you watch it." Historical fact. Medieval medicine was rooted in the theory of humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant balance. Sickness meant excess. Treatments ranged from herbal teas and leeches to prayers and astrology. And while some were absurd, others worked by luck, intuition, or centuries of quiet observation. She wipes her hands and moves to a shelf lined with jars. Powdered toad, ground amber, dried nettle, vinegar of roses. Each label is written in spidery Latin. She plucks one jar, mandrake, and smiles wryly. "Good for pain," she says, "and for getting rid of unwanted husbands." You can't tell if she's joking. Probably. Outside, a cold wind slaps against the walls, carrying with it the distant toll of a church bell. You remember hearing once that people believed bells could scare away storms and sickness. Sound as medicine is not so far from truth. Sound still soothes, doesn't it? Obscure tidbit. Many medieval doctors carried urine charts, color guides to diagnose illness. A good healer could tell if a person was pregnant, feverish, or dying simply by holding a flask of their urine to the light. Imagine a world where your health depended on someone squinting at your pee by candlelight. The healer stirs another pot, this one bubbling with a broth that smells faintly of sage and bone. She ladles a bit into a bowl and hands it to you. "For warmth," she says. You sip cautiously. It's salty, earthy, and oddly comforting. "People forget," she murmurs, "that warmth is the first medicine." You stay until the child's breathing softens, until the candle burns low, until the healer herself sighs and leans back, exhausted but calm. Before you leave, you ask, "How did you learn all this?" She shrugs. "My mother, her mother before her." None of it's written down. Paper doesn't hold memory the way hands do. As you step outside, snow begins to fall again, gentle, forgiving. You realize that in a world without science, knowledge was a flame passed hand to hand, flickering but never dying. And you think maybe that's still true. By the time you leave the healer's cottage, night has swallowed everything. The road, the trees, the sound of your own steps, they all dissolve into the blackness. Only your breath reminds you that you're still here. The darkness in medieval times wasn't like the kind we know today. Ours has screens, street lights, glowing clocks. Theirs was total. You pull your cloak tighter as a small lantern swings from your hand, the flame trembling in its glass cage. Every gust of wind feels personal, like the night itself is testing you. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks open. "Traveler," a voice calls. You turn to see an old man standing by his gate, holding a candle stub. "Best keep to the middle of the road," he warns. "The dead walk close to walls." You nod, not entirely sure whether to thank him or run. Historical fact. Before public lighting, medieval towns enforced curfew, from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. When the evening bell rang, fires were banked, candles snuffed, and people stayed inside. Being caught out after dark was suspicious. Only thieves, watchmen, or fools wandered the streets. You walk on. The silence thickens until you start hearing your own thoughts too loudly. The shadows twist. Every bush becomes a crouching figure, every distant clatter a threat. But then, softly, you hear singing. A group of watchmen, torches in hand, walk past you, their song echoing through the night. All's well, they chant at intervals. The words are both comfort and warning. If we stop singing, something's wrong. Obscure tidbit. Some medieval towns had night constables who patrolled with lanterns, shouting the hours and reporting fires or suspicious noises. They were nicknamed bellmen. Imagine trying to sleep while someone strolls past your window every hour yelling, "It's 2 of the clock, and all is well." Your lantern flickers. You pause under a tree, shielding it from the wind. In its dim light, you notice strange marks carved into the bark. A circle, a cross, and a series of dots. You remember hearing that travelers carved symbols like these to warn others of dangers ahead. An angry dog, a cruel landlord, or a place where food was scarce. The medieval version of a 5-star review system, only far less cheerful. You move on. Somewhere a wolf howls. It's distant, but the sound claws through the silence anyway. You can't help smiling nervously. "Probably just hungry," you mutter. "Aren't we all?" You reach a small bridge over a frozen stream. Beneath it, the water still whispers faintly. You hold your lantern over the edge and see your reflection. Ghostly, blurred. For a moment, you look like one of those wandering spirits the old man warned you about. It hits you then. The medieval fear of the dark wasn't childish. It was rational. Darkness was danger. Not metaphorically, literally. Wolves, thieves, cold, hunger. And perhaps worst of all, your own imagination. Still, there's something beautiful here too. In the flicker of your small flame, in the courage it takes just to keep walking. The medieval world was made of fear, yes, but also of faith. Faith that the sun would rise again. Faith that the next step would land on solid ground. You reach an inn just before your lantern dies. The door opens, spilling out golden light and laughter. Inside, a dozen faces glow around a single roaring fire. The warmth hits you like forgiveness. A man raises a mug. "Traveler, you look like you've wrestled with the night and lost." You grin. "Barely escaped." He laughs. "Then drink. That's the cure for fear." You sit by the hearth, the last of your tension melting into the heat. The dark presses against the windows, but inside, everything glows. You realize, in a world without electricity, light was more than survival, it was community. Each candle shared was a declaration. We're still here. And as your eyes grow heavy and the inn's laughter fades into a hum, you think, maybe that's what all of history has been trying to do. Keep the dark out, one little flame at a time. You wake to the soft toll of a bell. Morning light spills through the cracks in the shutters like warm milk over a wooden table. The innkeeper has long since gone to tend the horses, and the fire is just a whisper of red ash. Outside, the world smells faintly of wet stone and bread baking somewhere nearby. You step into the street, boots crunching frost, and follow the distant rhythm of bells. The sound leads you inevitably to the heart of every medieval town, the church. Its shadow falls over everything else, even the market and the tavern. Its steeple points upward like an argument no one dares contest. You push open the heavy wooden door. It groans like an old man who's seen too much. Inside, it's dark and cool, not empty, but still. A few figures kneel before the altar, heads bowed, hands clasped. You can hear every shift of cloth, every scrape of boot leather on stone. Even the air seems cautious here. You take a seat on one of the back benches. The wood is hard, polished smooth by centuries of restless hands. The scent of incense lingers, sweet, smoky, ancient. A priest walks slowly down the aisle, his robes sweeping like a tide. His expression suggests he's thinking about divine mysteries or possibly next week's fish shortage. When he speaks, it's a whisper, not from weakness, but reverence. Everyone else follows suit. Even the smallest cough sounds like a thunderclap in the hush. Historical fact: silence in medieval churches wasn't just about respect. It was law. Talking, laughing, or even humming outside designated moments could result in penance or fines. In some monasteries, monks took literal vows of silence that lasted weeks or months, communicating only through hand gestures. A bird flutters high in the rafters. No one looks up. They pretend it isn't there because in a sacred space even nature was expected to behave. You study the stained glass. Each panel tells a story. Saints burning, angels arguing, sinners falling. All rendered in colors that somehow look both eternal and tired. The sunlight streaming through it paints the stone floor in fractured rainbows. For a brief moment it feels as if you're walking on something holy, or at least expensive. Beside you, a woman kneels, whispering fervently. You catch a few words: mercy, hunger, frost. Her hands are raw and cracked. You realize her prayer isn't poetic. It's practical. She's not bargaining for heaven. She's negotiating survival. You glance at the priest. He's lighting candles now, one for each name murmured in the dark. Obscure tidbit: in some medieval churches, people were fined for bringing animals inside, though exceptions were made for falcons, since noblemen couldn't bear to part with them, even during Mass. There's at least one record of a sermon being interrupted when a hawk dove at a pigeon perched on the pulpit. God presumably looked the other way. The priest begins a chant, low and rhythmic, in Latin. You don't understand the words, but the melody seeps into you like warmth through cold stone. The sound fills the space without breaking the silence. This is what faith was, once. Not a shout, but a murmur. A steady hum against the fear and noise of the world outside. You close your eyes. The chanting continues. Somewhere, a candle sputters out. No one moves. The absence of that single flame feels oddly personal. Historians still debate whether medieval people were truly pious or simply obedient. Maybe they were both. Maybe silence was just another kind of prayer, one meant to keep the world from falling apart. When you finally leave, the sunlight feels loud. The marketplace clamor greets you like a slap. And you think perhaps silence was a luxury too. By noon, the church bell tolls again. Not for prayer this time, but for lunch. The streets smell of roasting onions, cabbage, and the faintly alarming aroma of something boiled too long. You follow your nose to a long, low hall near the center of town. Inside, benches stretch endlessly, and the air buzzes with chatter and the clang of wooden spoons on clay bowls. This is no tavern. It's a guild hall, a place where workers eat together, bound by trade and by table. A man with a beard that could house a family of birds gestures for you to sit. Eat, he says. If you don't, someone else will. You do as told. Before you is a bowl of thick stew, barley, root vegetables, maybe something once feathered. The bread beside it is hard enough to build with. You dunk it anyway. A woman across from you scolds a young apprentice for speaking before grace. Manners before mouths, she snaps, or you'll choke on your words. Historical fact: medieval dining was governed by strict etiquette, not just at castles but everywhere. The table was seen as a moral mirror. To eat properly was to prove your virtue. Forks were rare and considered effeminate in many regions. Instead, people used knives, spoons, or their fingers, but always with elaborate rules. Never lick the knife. Never reach across the table. And absolutely never sneeze into the bread. The guild master raises a hand. Conversation dies instantly. He speaks a brief blessing, not flowery, just firm. May the work of our hands feed the hunger of the day. Then the room comes back to life. You notice how everyone eats in rhythm. There's a pace to it, a ritual. Scoop, chew, swallow, listen. Even laughter happens in moderation. This isn't just a meal, it's a lesson in order. You glance down the table. The apprentices sit at one end, the masters at the other. Rank and food are linked. The higher your skill, the better your portion. You can tell a lot about a person by how much meat floats in their bowl. Obscure tidbit. Some medieval banquets featured an assize of bread, a law dictating the exact size and price of loaves based on grain cost, to prevent bakers from cheating. If caught, dishonest bakers were sometimes forced to carry their bad bread through town, wearing it like a shameful necklace. Someone nearby is telling a story about a feast gone wrong, a noble who choked on a pheasant bone, and how everyone debated whether it was divine punishment or just bad luck. You laugh softly. No one else does. Apparently, laughing at nobles is still risky business. The woman beside you offers a jug of ale. For the throat, she says. You thank her. The ale is cloudy and warm, but it cuts through the stew nicely. You ask, do you always eat together like this? She nods. It keeps men honest. If a man cheats his trade, he won't have the stomach to face the table. That's the thing about medieval life. Everything, even lunch, had rules. You didn't just feed the body, you performed morality 3 times a day. As the meal winds down, scraps are gathered, bones set aside. Nothing is wasted. The table is wiped clean with a shared cloth, the same one used to dry hands. Hygiene wasn't a concept yet, but efficiency, they had that down. A small child wanders through the hall with a wooden bucket, collecting leftovers for the poor. You drop your crust in. The child smiles, a tooth missing. Historians still debate whether such charity was sincere or just performative. But watching the bucket fill, you decide it doesn't matter. Warm food is still warm food. When you leave, your hands smell faintly of onion and ale. You pass a stray dog licking the stone steps. Somewhere behind you, someone begins singing a slow, crooked tune about bread, hunger, and forgiveness. You don't know the words, but you hum along anyway. The next morning, the frost is heavier. It clings to windows like lace and outlines the rooflines in white. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak. A dull brown thing that's both warm and intentionally unremarkable. You've learned by now that color, in the medieval world, is not just decoration. It's declaration. As you walk, you notice it immediately, the hierarchy of hues. Peasants in drab wools. Tradesmen in darker dyes, muted reds and greens. And then, like walking sunlight, a noble passes by in golden yellow lined with fur so thick it practically has opinions. You stare too long, of course. Everyone does. He doesn't glance back, but his cloak moves like he owns the very air. Which, technically, he sort of does. Historical fact. In the Middle Ages, color wasn't a matter of taste. It was law. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what. Certain fabrics and dyes were reserved for specific classes. Only nobles could wear purple or gold-threaded garments. Only royalty could don ermine or certain silks. In England, even the shade of blue could mark your social rank. A woman selling ribbons on the corner catches your eye. Wool? She asks. You nod. She hands you a strip dyed pale green. "No one will arrest you for this," she adds with a wink. You pay her a coin and tie the ribbon around your wrist. Feels like a tiny rebellion, but in truth, no one will care. Your life isn't colorful enough to matter. You watch as a parade of robes passes by. Scholars in somber black, clergy in deep crimson, soldiers in faded leather. Color is not simply seen, it's enforced. Obscure tidbit. In Florence, dye makers had to swear oaths not to reveal their trade secrets, and certain shades were made by fermenting roots, insects, or even, well, let's just say animal byproducts. The smell of wealth, quite literally, wasn't always pleasant. You pass a tailor's shop, where apprentices work near a fogged-up window. Inside, a noblewoman is arguing over the hem of a gown. She gestures like she's fencing, voice rising. The tailor nods solemnly, as if her complaint about the drape of velvet were a theological debate. Her gown is blue, a rich ultramarine, rare and expensive. The color comes from lapis lazuli ground finer than flour, imported from far-off lands. That gown could feed a village for a month. Historians still debate. You murmur to yourself whether fashion was about status or faith, because in some cities, bright colors were believed to reflect divine order, each hue corresponding to virtue or vice. Yellow for envy, red for passion, black for humility. The irony being, of course, that black dye cost a fortune. You keep walking, ribbon trailing at your wrist. It catches a beam of sunlight and glows faintly, a small flash of green in a sea of gray. By afternoon, the streets fill with a quiet bustle. Children chase chickens, bakers haul loaves, and a monk scolds a merchant for wearing too much red. You smile, because even in a world without social media, people still find ways to judge each other's outfits. A sudden gust of wind tugs at your cloak, revealing a patch of your tunic. A passing noble frowns. Too fine for your face, too coarse for his company. You pull the cloak tighter. It's funny, you think, how much people still measure worth by fabric. And centuries later, when we label clothes as designer or discount, we're still dyeing our pride in invisible laws. You pass a washerwoman scrubbing linen at the well. Her hands are red from cold water and lye, but her eyes are kind. "Color fades," she says, not looking up, "but dirt always returns." You don't quite know what she means, but it feels true. As night falls, you notice your ribbon has come loose. You let it flutter away into the wind, one small color among many. That night, you lie beneath a thatched roof, and you realize you are not alone. There's a family of 6 sharing the same room, and possibly the same blanket. In one corner, a goat shifts its weight. Somewhere nearby, a baby sighs in its sleep. You stare into the darkness, listening to the chorus of human and animal breathing, the symphony of medieval night. Sleep here isn't a private affair. It's a group project. The hearth glows faintly, a coal-red heartbeat in the dark. The air smells of smoke, straw, and people. You turn on your side, bumping elbows with someone who mutters, "Watch it." You mutter back, "Sorry," and that's the night's rhythm. Dream, bump, apologize, repeat. Historical fact. In medieval Europe, most homes had one bed, often shared by entire families, guests, and sometimes travelers. Privacy was rare, and warmth was the priority. Even inns placed strangers side by side, a practice called double lodging. The phrase "sleep tight" comes from the ropes that held straw mattresses together, ropes that needed tightening nightly or you'd sink. A rooster crows prematurely outside. Someone curses softly. You can't tell if it's morning or just an ambitious bird. Across the room, The eldest son sits up. He throws a log onto the fire, stirring the room into a reddish glow. His face is illuminated, tired, gentle, routine. He moves like someone who's done this 1,000 nights before. Obscure tidbit. Sleep in medieval times came in two parts. People often experienced first sleep and second sleep. Waking around midnight to pray, tend fires, or even chat quietly before drifting back. It wasn't insomnia. It was culture. Nights were slower then, and rest came in installments. You wake midway through, too, just as the mother of the house begins whispering a short prayer, her voice blending with the crackle of the fire. You can hear rain outside, soft as breath. The walls creak like an old memory. For a moment, time feels slower. You realize the darkness here isn't frightening. It's shared. Even the goat seems peaceful now. Someone begins to snore. A sound so deep and resonant it could double as a chant. You stifle a laugh. The woman next to you elbows you again, this time more gently. Historians still debate whether medieval people slept better or worse than we do now. Fewer distractions, yes, but also more fleas. It's a tough call. You close your eyes again and think about the strange democracy of it all. How in sleep, ranks dissolve. The noble and the peasant, the merchant and the child. All breathing the same smoky air, all surrendering to the same darkness. When you dream, it's of warmth. Not wealth or color or law, just warmth. And as the first blue of dawn creeps through the shutters, you hear the murmur of life beginning again. Someone stirring the coals, a baby yawning, the rooster finally getting it right this time. You rise, stretching, bones creaking like the beams overhead. Outside, mist clings to the fields, and the air smells of wood smoke and dew. Sleep well? The father asks, though he doesn't wait for your answer. Everyone knows the truth. No one sleeps well in winter, but they sleep together. You step out into the morning and think, maybe that's enough. You wake to the smell of wood smoke and something less poetic. It's not that the medieval world lacks charm. It's just that it comes with texture. You stretch, look around, and realize that the bathroom is a bucket by the wall and a prayer for strong breezes. You step outside, and the air hits you. Sharp, cold, and honest. The kind of air that smells like iron and ash, like everything that has ever burned or been washed only by rain. People move about their business, and somehow, miraculously, they seem fine. They've made peace with the world's aromas. Historical fact. In medieval Europe, frequent bathing wasn't the virtue you'd expect. Many people believed that opening the pores too often made the body vulnerable to disease. The church even associated excessive bathing with vanity, a slippery slope from soap to sin. Of course, that didn't stop everyone. Public bathhouses were common in early medieval cities. Places to soak, gossip, and conduct, well, business. But as time went on, they got a reputation for less saintly activities. Eventually, the bathhouse became synonymous with moral decay, and the scent of piety became, unfortunately, human. You walk through a narrow street where water drips from upper windows. Not rain, you quickly realize, but the daily waste toss. Someone yells, "Gardaloo," before emptying a bucket. You dodge right in time. "Ah, morning in the city," you mumble. "Smells like history." A woman nearby is scrubbing linen in a wooden tub. The water turns gray instantly. She glances at you. "They say the French bathe weekly," she says, shaking her head like that's excessive. "Must be exhausting." Obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, bathing was regulated down to the number of times per year, sometimes as few as 5. But they were permitted to wash their hands and face daily. A sort of compromise between hygiene and holiness. You stop by a small stream where a boy is splashing water on his face. He grins, teeth bright against the morning frost. "Makes you feel alive," he says, though his hands are nearly blue. You nod. It's hard to argue with that. There's a faint herbal scent in the air, rosemary, sage, maybe lavender. You follow it to a woman selling bundles of dried plants. "For scent," she says, pressing one into your hand. "Hang it by your bed or in your clothes. Keeps away the plague or the neighbors." You laugh softly, tucking the bundle into your cloak. The aroma is comforting, earthy. It almost works. As you walk, you notice that no one seems to mind the grime. It's simply part of the world's fabric, like the dirt roads, the soot-streaked walls, the hay-stuffed shoes. Cleanliness is relative, and so is disgust. Historians still debate whether medieval people were truly dirty or just differently clean. Some argue that they practiced forms of hygiene we no longer notice. Washing hands before meals, using linen undergarments to absorb sweat, changing them often. It wasn't modern, but it wasn't chaos either. Still, you can't help thinking how strange it is that something so simple, a bath, could carry moral weight. To scrub too often was to tempt vanity. To stay unwashed was to prove humility. The body was a vessel for the soul, not a canvas for soap ads. As you pass a church, a monk is sprinkling holy water on the steps. You can't help but think maybe that counts. By evening, the sky turns pewter, and you sit near a small fire, your rosemary bundle crackling faintly in the heat. The scent fills the air, clean, sharp, and fleeting, and you think maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe dirt isn't the enemy. Maybe it's just proof of living. The next morning begins not with sunrise, but with sound. A low, resonant bell rolls over the rooftops, vibrating through your bones. It's not a melody. It's a command. Somewhere nearby, someone mutters, "Prime already?" and begins to stir. You realize that, in this world, the bell is time. Historical fact. Before mechanical clocks became common, bells were the heartbeat of the medieval day. Monks used them to mark the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. The rest of society followed their lead. When the bell rang, you worked. When it rang again, you ate. And when it tolled after dark, you stopped or risked sin, suspicion, or exhaustion. You step outside as the sound fades, leaving behind an echo that feels like order itself. The streets begin to fill. Bakers opening shutters, merchants setting up carts, dogs stretching as though they too have appointments to keep. It's strange how the world runs without numbers. People don't ask, "What time is it?" They ask, "How long since the bell?" Obscure tidbit. In some towns, the night watchman walked the streets ringing a small bell and announcing the hour by voice, partly to mark time, partly to prove he was still awake. It was both clock and crime deterrent. You watch as a blacksmith wipes soot from his face. He glances toward the church tower and nods, as though receiving invisible instructions. Then he lifts his hammer, and the day begins. There's something deeply rhythmic about it. The whole village moving in shared intervals, a living metronome. No one needs a wristwatch. The sound itself divides life into manageable fragments. You pass a group of children playing with sticks, pretending to ring bells of their own. They mimic the tones, bong, bong, and laugh when a real bell answers from afar, as if the world itself is playing along. You smile. Imagine being scolded by sound. You whisper to yourself, "No notifications, just God's ringtone." The bell rings again, softer this time. Midday. The market smells of bread and fish, the chatter blending with the hum of life. You buy a small loaf, hard crust, soft inside, and sit by the fountain. Time feels slower when you can't count it. Historians still debate whether people felt time differently back then. Without exact hours, life was measured in tasks, not minutes. You plowed until sunset, prayed until peace, worked until the bell forgave you. By evening, the sky bruises purple, and the bells toll again, long, low, final. The day exhales. People drift home in quiet rhythm. The blacksmith sets down his hammer. The children stop their game. Even the dogs lie down as though trained by sound. You stand there for a moment, letting the silence after the bell fill your chest. It's not empty, it's vast. And you think how odd it is that we now chase seconds, alarms, and blinking screens, while once upon a time, a single bell told an entire world when to breathe. The last bell of the evening has faded, but its echo still clings to the rooftops like smoke. You stand in the twilight of a medieval town that is slowly, carefully shutting down. One by one, windows close, doors bolt. A few faint lamps flicker behind thin shutters, casting yellow stripes across the cobblestones. The air grows colder, and the silence deepens. Thick, deliberate, and ancient. You start to walk, your footsteps loud in the hush. The streets feel unfamiliar now. Every shadow looks like something that used to be alive. Historical fact. In many medieval towns, there were actual laws enforcing curfews. When the curfew bell rang, from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire, you were expected to extinguish your hearth, go home, and stay there. It was a matter of safety as much as superstition. Fire spread easily in wooden cities, and night was when both flame and fear came alive. You pause outside a small cottage, its smoke barely visible against the dark sky. Inside, you hear muffled laughter, then a hush, as if someone remembered the rule of quiet. A lone watchman passes by with a lantern, the light bobbing like a floating star. All's well, he calls softly, and the words drift like a lullaby. You realize that all's well isn't news, it's reassurance. You walk toward the edge of town where the fields begin. The stars are fierce and close, the kind that make you believe they're whispering. The moon lights the frost-covered grass, and for a moment, everything looks silvered and still. But the silence has layers. It's not peaceful, not yet. There's the rustle of unseen animals, the soft crackle of cooling roofs, the sigh of trees bending in wind. Every sound feels amplified by the absence of people. Obscure tidbit. Some villages believed that whistling after dark invited spirits. Others swore that if you walked alone at night, you might stumble into a fairy procession and never find your way home again. You smile at the thought. In the dark, the imagination takes over. Even the creak of a door becomes a story. Historians still debate whether medieval people feared the night more for its dangers or its mysteries. It's possible they simply respected it, the way sailors respect the sea. You didn't defy darkness. You endured it. A candle flickers in a window nearby, and for an instant, the world feels small and safe again. You imagine the family inside. Parents whispering, children sleeping, a loaf of bread cooling on the hearth. And you think about how the night once belonged to everything beyond human control, whether wild things, faith, and silence. You pull your cloak tighter. The wind carries the faint scent of wood smoke and time. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then stops. All's well, the watchman calls again. His voice is distant now, a fading heartbeat. And for the first time, you understand that the silence isn't emptiness at all. It's the sound of the world holding its breath. The next morning comes slow. The sky blushes faintly pink behind the church tower, and the frost glitters like spilled sugar on the roofs. The bell rings, soft, almost apologetic, as if even it is tired. You wake not with urgency, but with awareness. There's no alarm, no rush, no need to chase the ticking of something invisible. Just the small, steady rhythm of breathing, of life continuing. You step outside, and the village feels lighter somehow. The baker's door creaks open. The smell of bread stretches across the square. A cat yawns from a windowsill, and you realize this is what rest looked like when time wasn't owned. Historical fact: medieval peasants, for all their hard labor, often had more holidays than modern workers. Church feast days, saints' days, fasting periods, all built into the calendar. Between planting and harvest, people rested, feasted, told stories, repaired, and remembered that life was not only toil. Obscure tidbit: in some regions there was a rule that forbade heavy work on Sundays. Even combing wool could be considered sinful labor. Instead, people were encouraged to nap, pray, or simply be. You sit on a low stone wall, watching sunlight spill over the fields. The same soil that demanded sweat now glows with quiet beauty. The world, it seems, knows when to pause, even if we've forgotten how. Historians still debate whether the medieval rhythm of feast and fast was healthier than ours. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe rest isn't a luxury, it's a kind of rebellion. You think back on everything: the bells, the dirt, the rules, the silence. Each one a piece of order, a small attempt to make sense of chaos. And though they may seem strange now, they built a world that somehow survived. You breathe in with smoke, bread, frost. You breathe out noise, hurry, light. And somewhere in that exchange, the centuries disappear. The day drifts into gold, and the sound of the last bell trembles through the air, softer now, like memory itself exhaling. You sit by the fire, eyes half closed, watching the embers pulse like tiny hearts. The warmth hums against your skin. The room smells faintly of ash and bread, rosemary and wool. You listen, not for words, but for the quiet rhythm that connects everything. The crackle of the fire, the faint breath of wind slipping through the shutters, the heartbeat you can feel in your fingertips. You think about all the rules that once shaped the world. Bells for time, silence for safety, dirt for humility, rest for grace. They seem old-fashioned, yet strangely wise. Maybe the world was never simpler, only slower. Maybe people weren't trying to control life, only to live inside it. Outside, the frost deepens. A star flickers, and then another. The fields are still. You can almost hear the earth breathing. You lean back. The fire shifts, sighing softly. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls once more. Not a command now, but a reminder that everything moves, ends, begins again. You let your eyes close. The centuries blur together. Monks and farmers, bells and kitchens, silence and sleep. All of it folding softly into rest. And as the last ember fades, you realize, maybe the greatest rule of all is this one. When the world grows quiet, you listen. When it grows still, you rest. And when it all feels too loud to bear, you remember that once, long ago, people survived by slowing down. Good night. All's well.